Stele of Thonis Heraklion. Around 440 BC, the ancient Greek author Herodotus wrote about a coastal city at the edge of ancient Egypt that gazed upon the ships as they arrived from the Mediterranean. It was one of the greatest port cities on Earth. But one day, it was gone. Was it a real place, or was it like the mythical city of Atlantis? After years and years of searching the mouth of the Nile, it was found. French archaeologist Frank Gaudio discovered its submerged remains in 2000 in Abu Qir Bay off Egypt's north coast. Divers found a fragment of a rock in the murky waters and then began pulling up more and more artifacts. Among the ruins, Gaudio's team found a large inscribed stone referring to the town as Thonis. Until then, researchers widely believed that Thonis and Heraklion were different places, but the hieroglyphics prove that they were one, with the Greeks calling the city Heraklion and the Egyptians calling it Thonis. Commissioned by Pharaoh Nectanebo I, who reigned from 378 to 362 BC, the stele of Thonis Heraklion is the twin of another found at Naucratis. The two are identical, minus the column identifying the name of the place each one was found. The Tablet's decree states that 10% of all taxes from both local production and imports must go toward a temple dedicated to the Egyptian deity Nath Ad-Sais in the eastern Nile Delta of Lower Egypt. Divers at Heraklion also found a nearly 18-foot-tall, 6.6-ton red granite statue of Hapi, a divine personification of Nile floods. Dating back to the 4th century BC, it's the largest known example of a Hapi statue, the actual god, not the feeling. They also found ruins of temples, shards of pottery, precious jewelry, coins, oil lamps, processional barges, and many other statues. During the 2nd century BC, Thonis Heraklion experienced an earthquake that liquefied the ground beneath it, causing the city to sink into the sea. And until its relatively recent rediscovery, experts were left to wonder if it was purely mythical in nature. Antikythera Man. The Antikythera wreck might just be the world's most famous shipwreck. The Roman-era ship went down around 86 BC and is believed to have been carrying part of the loot from a Roman general after a successful campaign. It has given us hundreds of treasures, including the Antikythera mechanism, often referred to as the world's oldest analog computer. The mechanism is actually an ancient Greek astronomical calculator made up of around 30 bronze gears. Discovered in 1900, expeditions have been going on for years, bringing up hundreds of bronze and marble statues, coins, jars, and all kinds of jewelry. But even more surprising has been the more recent discovery of human remains of the crew and passengers. Remains of around 4 people have been found over the years, but in 2016, a team uncovered a whole new skeleton and were finally able to perform a DNA analysis. It was the first time in 40 years that a new skeleton had been discovered, and finally, with modern technology, we can get a lot more information. Ancient DNA expert Hans Schroeder says that the discovery might provide the first opportunity to examine the genetics of an ancient mariner. Human remains from ancient shipwrecks are extremely uncommon, as you can imagine, especially for thousands of years ago. It looks like it was a man that may have been trapped below deck when the ship sunk. Researchers are hoping to find even more human remains in the wreck. Underwater tank graveyard. At the beginning of 2015, a Twitter account specializing in abandoned places posted an image of what appeared to be an underwater tank graveyard. The photo contained a pile of World War II-era tanks found submerged, including some that were upside down, as if they were carelessly dropped into the water from high above. The picture went viral, receiving hundreds of retweets within hours alone. People were curious about where this submerged site was and why there were so many tanks. The Daily Edge, an Irish news publication, had the answer. It turns out that the photo was a screenshot from a 2010 video shot by Richard Stevenson off the Donegal coast. He's been a professional diver for many years, specializing in underwater filming, and was excited to find this particular location. The site is situated just 66 feet from the Malin Head shore and sits 213 feet underwater. Its contents, including the tanks, had sunk to the ocean floor in September 1944 after the ship carrying them was hit by a German U-boat. Sadly, 113 people died in the wreck, which sank too quickly for the crew to put out a distress call. The eerie site stands as it did long ago, as a disturbing testament to the destruction of war. Granite Head of Caesarion. Ptolemy XV Caesar, who went by the nickname Caesarion, was Egypt's last pharaoh and Cleopatra's illegitimate son with Julius Caesar. He reigned alongside his mother until she committed suicide in 30 BC and continued ruling on his own until the Roman Emperor Octavian had him put to death not very long after. He was quite the threat to his rule, and there was no way Octavian was going to let him live. There are very few surviving images of Caesarion since most of them were destroyed. One of these depictions came in the form of an enormous granite head that was pulled from the harbor of Alexandria in 1997. Dating back to the 1st century BC, it was found in a section of the ancient city that was submerged by earthquakes and tidal waves. The head was likely once part of a complete statue of the ruler. Alexandria's underwater ruins consist of numerous other fascinating artifacts, including a marble head of the Roman princess Antonia Minor, a sphinx, several shipwrecks, and much, much more. Gator artifacts. Earlier this year, an alligator from Mississippi was killed in Eagle Lake. The monstrous reptile weighed 750 pounds and was an absolute giant, measuring almost 14 feet in length. It was local hunter John Hamilton who took the beast out. But it's not the alligator that we're here to talk about today. It's what John discovered after he killed the monster. When John brought the carcass to the butchers, he got a phone call saying that something unexpected was taken out of the alligator's stomach. The butchers removed ancient artifacts that have since been dated back to 6000 BC. That's 8,000 years before today. And before you ask, the answer is no. The alligator has not been alive for 8,000 years. Instead, it must have accidentally eaten the artifacts while lurking at the bottom of the lake. Two main artifacts were uncovered. The first is a type of stone called a plummet, which only dates back to 1700 BC. The stone was used by early fishermen, likely as some kind of tool for sharpening bone hooks. The second artifact is the far more interesting one. It's called an atlatl dart point, and it was used as a projectile weapon. The ancient Native Americans in the area would secure the dart point to a hunting spear, then use it to spear creatures from a distance. As for how the alligator got a hold of the artifacts, it's not that complicated. People settled in Mississippi 12,000 years ago, and they left lots of treasure behind. The alligator accidentally turned into an archaeologist when it slurped them up from the lake bed. Missing World War II submarine. Diver and wreck hunter Massimo Domenico Bordone was out exploring off the coast of Sardinia when he came across a missing wreck from World War II. It was the long-lost British submarine HMS P311, the only unnamed T-class boat. Although it was covered in seaweed and algae, Bordone was able to identify the vessel by the two Chariot-style torpedoes. These were propulsion vehicles that were fitted to secret naval weapons in World War II, where a diver would actually ride in it. The 275-foot submarine sits at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, under 328 feet of water. Before the vessel was found by Bordone and his team, it was last seen on December 28, 1942, as it left Scotland on its way to Malta, carrying 71 servicemen. The HMS P311 then seemingly vanished into thin air. Chances are the submarine was sunk by an Italian mine, but nobody knows for sure. All 71 lives on board were lost. As soon as Bordone saw it, he said that all he could think about was the destiny of the men who met their deaths underwater. The remains are believed to be sealed inside the vessel. It will most likely never be opened, and the submarine will be left alone in its final resting place in honor of the fallen. Relatives of one of the lost men told Massimo, "Sir, on behalf of the family of able seaman El Ati, I would like to thank you for finding HMS P311 and the care and respect that you have shown to those that perished. You have my grateful respect." SS Thistlegorm vehicles. During World War II, German bombers struck a British merchant navy ship called the SS Thistlegorm, causing it to sink to the bottom of the Red Sea. The vessel had been built just a year earlier and had only completed 3 successful voyages. Thistlegorm carried steel rails, aircraft parts, grain, rum, and other cargo throughout her short-lived career. She traveled to the US, Argentina, and the West Indies. The vessel departed Glasgow, Scotland for Alexandria, Egypt in 1941, loaded with armored vehicles, motorcycles, trucks, ammo, guns, radio equipment, aircraft and railway parts, and 2 train locomotives. A crash in the Suez Canal stopped Thistlegorm from passing through, so the ship docked at a safe anchorage off the Egyptian coast. The Germans suspected that Allied troops were hiding on the vessel, so they dispatched 2 bombers to find and destroy it. 2 bombs struck the ship, causing some of its ammunition cargo to explode. 9 people died as Thistlegorm sank to her watery grave. French explorer Jacques Cousteau rediscovered the site during the 1950s. It was soon forgotten about until the early 1990s, when the coastal city of Sharm el-Sheikh opened it to divers. The section that was blown off the 420-foot-long ship during the attack created a convenient opening that visitors can use for easy access to the inside, which still contains most of the cargo, including the vehicles. Bahia, did you know that planet Earth contains 20 known supervolcanoes which are capable of erupting with a volume thousands of times stronger than an average volcano? I didn't, but now I have one more thing to worry about. One such supervolcano, known as Campi Flegrei, is situated northwest of modern-day Naples, Italy. And while it's been thousands of years since it erupted, there is always a possibility of history repeating itself. The ancient Romans were blissfully unaware of this danger when they built Baia, a resort town that was once famous for its hot springs. It served as a playground of sorts for Roman elites, including Nero, Cicero, and Julius Caesar, who built villas there. Baia was also known for scandal and corruption, including wild parties, heavy drinking, and promiscuity. Despite its close proximity to the supervolcano, the city did not succumb to a volcanic eruption. It also survived being sacked during the barbarian invasions, and again in the 8th century by Muslim raiders. But malaria became an ongoing problem, and by 1500 Baia was completely abandoned. Mosquitoes have changed history more than you think. Its ruins partially sank into the Mediterranean Sea due to hydrothermal activity, causing some of the deserted town to fall below sea level. This appears to have occurred in 2 phases, first happening sometime between the 3rd and 5th centuries, and once again before the 8th century, ultimately submerging nearly the entire lower section. Today, the city's underwater ruins serve as one of few marine archaeological parks that are open to visitors, allowing people a first-hand glimpse at the crumbling structures via snorkeling, scuba diving, and glass-bottomed boats. This is definitely on my bucket list. How about you? What's on your bucket list? Let me know in the comments below. Antarctic rainforest. In 2017, scientists discovered evidence of a 90-million-year-old rainforest by analyzing a sediment core retrieved from beneath the Pine Island Glacier in Antarctica. They noticed a distinct layer in the core, and a closer look revealed ancient roots, pollen, spores, and remains of flowering plants. Antarctica was once ice-free, hosting a rainforest lush with vegetation that was completely different to its modern-day barren landscape. During the mid-Cretaceous period, the world was unimaginably different than it is today. The climate was extremely hot, with sea levels 558 feet higher than their current levels, and tropical sea surface temperatures hitting as high as 95 degrees. The numerous plant remains indicate that the coast of West Antarctica was back then a dense, temperate, swampy forest, similar to the forests found in New Zealand today. Paleoecologist Ulrich Salzman, a co-researcher in a recent study, said in a statement. The climate was mild, similar to that of modern-day Seattle, with an annual mean temperature of 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Data pulled from the study showed that carbon dioxide levels were much higher than they are today, and even higher than scientists previously believed, helping to keep the continent warm even through its annual 4 months of darkness. What do you think about such a cold place once being a dense rainforest? Let me know in the comments below. The longest creature ever. Last year, a team of researchers encountered what they believe might be the longest creature ever discovered while surveying the sea floor off Western Australia. Known as a siphonophore, they described it as an enormous spiral floating in the water column. Scientists admitted that they didn't know exactly how long the otherworldly organism is. They estimated that its outer ring measured nearly 155 feet and said that they were in the process of determining its entire length. At the time, the team believed that the siphonophore was at least 390 feet long. They promised to update the world once they know for sure. If their estimate is correct, the creature would surpass the lion's mane jellyfish as the world's longest marine animal. The current record holder is 120 feet long. The siphonophore also stands to supersede the 180-foot-long ribbon worm, which is the world's longest land animal. Siphonophores are predatory deep-sea dwellers made up of small clones that work together as one organism. They take on a rope-like appearance and resemble jellyfish. but are more closely related to corals and anemones. Lead researcher Nerida Wilson told CBC that the clones somehow communicate with one another to harmoniously take on different roles, like feeding and reproduction. Scientists admittedly know very little about siphonophores and don't even know how they reach such enormous lengths. Ancient shipwreck. Marine archaeologists have come across an interesting shipwreck filled with some pretty shocking treasures. The shipwreck was found off the coast of Greece, with its cargo including ancient artifacts from both Spain and Tunisia. As for the shipwreck itself, it had left its home port of Rome on its way to some trading destination when it met its fate. It's been dated back to sometime between 200 and 300 AD. When it set off from port, it was loaded with ceramic vessels called amphorae. Amphorae are what the Romans called their special containers that they used for storing important things like olive oil and wine for shipping. The shipwreck was discovered as part of an ongoing mission led by the National Hellenic Research Foundation to locate and record sunken antiquities around Greece. And believe it or not, uncovering a sunken ship actually takes a lot of manpower. Over 100 dives were conducted, involving a team of at least 23 scientists and technicians. They spent over 200 hours scouring the seabed to get all the details of this lost ship. But even after all that time, all they really know is that the shipwreck was a Roman merchant vessel that ran into some misfortune along the most important maritime trade route 2,000 years ago, linking the Middle East and Europe. Swedish Atlantis. Speaking of mythical, while working in the Baltic Sea off the Swedish coast in 2014, a team of divers discovered a submerged cache of rare Stone Age artifacts that was later dubbed Sweden's Atlantis. Ancient nomads left the site and its contents behind roughly 11,000 years ago when they abandoned what may be one of the oldest Nordic settlements ever found. Wood and flint tools, carvings, animal horns, ropes, and bones from aurochs, an ancestor of modern-day cattle, were all present at the site, where they sat in a black, gel-like sediment called gytja. Made from decaying peat, the substance buried the objects shortly after they were deposited, keeping them remarkably preserved for divers to find now. The incredible thing is that if this entire place had been on land, everything would have been based on the stone. Nothing organic would have been preserved. But here, there is a chance that more of the ancient settlement can be uncovered. Archaeologists hope to find nearby burials, which would indicate that the site was an actual settlement rather than a temporary camp. Under these unique conditions, it's possible for skeletons thousands of years old to be preserved. Despite its nickname, Sweden's Atlantis is not the fabled civilization Plato wrote about, as experts were quick to point out following its discovery, just in case anyone was confused. Underwater rivers. Last year, scientists from the University of Western Australia published a study detailing the fascinating discovery of an abundance of massive underwater rivers, technically known as dense shelf water cascades. Found along the continental shelf, they are almost like underwater waterfalls. Underwater rivers form when shallow, highly saline coastal waters lose heat during colder months. These streams are denser than the surrounding deeper waters, causing them to flow offshore along the ocean floor. This phenomenon was already known prior to this recent study, but our understanding was quite limited and didn't account for changes in seasons or anything like that. The underwater rivers off Australia occur across a 6,213-mile span during the fall and winter months. They are so powerful they can sustain high winds and high tides, making them unique among underwater rivers observed in other parts of the world. Scientists found that these streams play an important role by transporting material and matter from the continental shelf into deeper parts of the ocean. These and other discoveries are increasingly being made thanks to advanced technology. To document the underwater rivers in detail, the team deployed autonomous marine vehicles called ocean gliders, which traveled through the water collecting data that cannot be seen with the naked eye. You can't just send a diver to get swept away into the deep sea in an underwater river. The data used in the study spanned an entire decade, giving researchers a detailed look at the phenomenon's long-term behavior. And now for number 7. But first, it's shout-out time! Want to give a big thank you to Zia Mystics and Ashley Sue. Thanks so much for joining us, and always take advantage of those days off. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more videos like these. Ice Age monuments. Last year, a group of activists found what appeared to be deliberately arranged rock formations at the bottom of a lake while they were examining some gas pipelines in the Straits of Mackinac. between Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas using a remotely operated vehicle. If they are man-made, the linear and circular structures would date back some 10,000 years to the end of the last ice age. The discovery bears similarities to similar formations that were found in 2009 in Lake Huron, the Detroit Free Press reported. John O'Shea, the University of Michigan archaeologist who spotted the stone structures, reportedly heard rumors years ago of the submerged site more recently discovered in the Straits of Mackinac. But the person who saw them, a consultant hired by a gas company to explore the waters for a proposed pipeline project, was allegedly told to only consider shipwrecks in his analysis and to ignore everything else. So the rock formations went unreported. The consultant claimed that he tried repeatedly to obtain permission to have experts look at the site, but was eventually removed from the project for his efforts. This led some to suspect that the gas company was eager to push ahead with the project, even if it meant overlooking potential discoveries of structures left behind by indigenous people. Activists advocated for an opportunity for local tribes and scientists to further explore the formations. There are, of course, two sides to every story, and the company that hired the consultant denied that they limited his research. A spokesperson stated that the company detected no evidence of cultural resources in the Straits of Mackinac, nor was it aware of any such discoveries by the consultants it hired, but expressed an openness to examining any such reports. Controversies like this highlight the ongoing struggle to protect and preserve Native American culture, especially when doing so could interfere with corporate profit. Whether the stone structures will be studied remains to be seen. Severed hands. While working in Russia's Far East near the Chinese border in October 2018, some fishermen found a sack containing 54 severed human hands, along with medical bandages and surgical shoe covers. The alarmed gentleman called the local police, who determined through fingerprints that the hands belonged to at least 27 different people. In the meantime, rumors flew like wildfire, with some speculating that the hands were cut off as a punishment for theft. Police theorized that the severed appendages were amputated limbs from a medical facility that had been disposed of improperly, but they were left scratching their heads when they realized that many of the people the hands belonged to had had both hands cut off. Usually a person only needs one hand amputated. It's possible that the hands were cut off of corpses to retain fingerprint information after burial, a practice that is reportedly somewhat common in Russia, but the story remains unclear. The hands were not connected to any suspected criminal activity, and the Russian government offered little explanation beyond stating that the limbs came from a forensic lab and not to worry about it. They always say that. The Loch Ness Monster. The Loch Ness Monster has been spotted for the 8th time in just 1 year. In fact, Loch Ness Monster sightings are rising like crazy in 2021, after a record year in 2020 when the beast was spotted 13 times. But what could this possibly mean? Is the Loch Ness Monster getting braver, or are people's imaginations simply running a little wild? One of the most recent sightings was made by a father and his daughter on a holiday in the Scottish Highlands. They saw water ripples and an unidentified thing moving beneath the waves in Loch Ness while walking through the hills. They had a perfect view of the lake from where they were, and they noticed there was nothing artificial making the water ripple. All there was, well, all they could see anyway, was some kind of creature lurking just beneath the water surface. But this was only one sighting of the beast that lives in Loch Ness. Another man visiting the loch from Cambridge also witnessed an unidentified creature while scrutinizing the area with his binoculars. He saw a hump emerge from the waves, looking kind of like the back of a giant turtle, except black in color. The creature then dove back into the lake and was gone. Of course, these sightings aren't proof the Loch Ness Monster really does exist. However, there are lots of experts who believe it does. And more than that, they believe that the Loch Ness Monster is actually a plesiosaur, a type of dinosaur that has somehow remained alive in this one body of water. Long-lost submarine. In April 1942, the British submarine HMS Urge vanished off the coast of Malta after a series of successes taking down enemy warships. As Italian and German forces intensified their campaigns against the British naval port, the vessel and several warships were ordered to head to Egypt. But the HMS Urge never arrived at Alexandria, and the 44 people aboard were reported missing at sea. Belgian diver Jean-Pierre Misson claimed in 2015 to have found the wrecked submarine off the Libyan coast and argued that Italian planes had sunk it in a secret mission. If Misson's assertions were true, it would have meant that the HMS Urge was far off course when it sank, giving rise to conspiracy theories about the submarine's captain ignoring orders and about an alleged cover-up of a secret mission it was conducting when it went down. Archaeologists recently refuted Misson's claims after repeated dives to a submarine wreck about 6 miles east of Malta confirmed that it was the long-lost HMS Urge. They presented pretty convincing evidence, too, as the vessel's name was embossed on its conning tower, and a 3-dimensional scan of its hull matches the missing vessel's measurements. Speaking with Live Science, archaeologist Timmy Gambin said the submarine's identity is now 100% confirmed. It appears as though the HMS Urge encountered a naval mine placed by a German warship, blasting a hole through the vessel's pressure hull. This would have caused the submarine to fill rapidly with water and plunge to the sea floor. Gambin hopes to disprove Misson's outlandish claims once and for all by showing that the HMS Urge did not sink off North Africa. Oldest seawall. Humans have long favored coastal life because it's beautiful and because you can take advantage of resources on land and at sea. But life near the ocean means adapting to the ever-changing coastline, especially when it comes to storms and rising sea levels. You kind of think twice about that nice house on the beach when a hurricane is on the way. So we build seawalls. In late 2019, archaeologists announced the discovery of the world's oldest known seawall off northern Israel's Carmel coast. It was found near 15 Neolithic villages located as much as 660 feet from the modern shoreline. Most of the time, these submerged structures are covered in sand, which helps to preserve them but obscures them from view. Every now and then, however, a storm reveals parts of the villages before covering them back up a few days later. This is how the seawall was discovered, opening a very narrow window of time for archaeologists to document it. Dating back roughly 7,000 years to the Stone Age, the seawall measures about 330 feet long, showing that even during prehistoric times, people faced some of the same issues we do today when it comes to combating the encroaching sea. The wall is made up of large boulders, with each measuring as much as 3 feet wide or more, and weighing more than 1.1 tons. It's located next to an ancient underwater town called Tel Hres, which likely contained a population of a few hundred people who made olive oil and engaged in other agricultural activities. Experts believe that Tel Hres sat somewhere between 7 and 10 feet above sea level when it was built. At the time, sea levels were rising rapidly as glaciers melted. So much so that even if the ocean did not initially swallow the town, brutal storm surges became a problem, prompting residents to build the wall. Eventually, however, they were left with no choice but to relocate further inland. Living prehistoric creature. Imagine spending years looking for an insect-like creature smaller than a sesame seed. That's exactly what biologists Ian Hogg and Byron Adams did. For years, the two worked together in search of Tulbergia mediantarctica. It was originally discovered in 1964, but no one had seen it since then. They began their search in 2006, but their efforts repeatedly turned up fruitless. Finally, in 2018, dozens of specimens turned up under some rocks on a remote cliff similar to the one described in a note by the entomologist who originally discovered the species. The 6-legged creatures are pale and have 2 antennas, and they do not survive long when exposed to the dry Antarctic air. Within a minute of the biologist lifting the rock, the bugs began to dehydrate and die. T. mediantarctica is a springtail, a type of primitive insect that is extremely common but often goes unnoticed in its environment. According to Scientific American, there are several species that live in Antarctica, including T. mediantarctica, and they've been there for millions of years, encompassing up to 30 ice ages. But how they got there is unknown. Usually, animals in Antarctica can only survive near the coastline. These springtails, along with certain types of mites, worms, and wingless flies, are found deep inland. Originally, scientists believed that advancing glaciers repeatedly wiped out Antarctica's life over dozens of ice ages. But these creatures proved incredibly resilient, having survived numerous icy periods and leading scientists to believe that they descended from the continent's original inhabitants. How they survived through such harsh conditions, in addition to the mystery of where they came from, remain open to speculation for now. Underwater Jesus. You may be surprised to learn that there are numerous submerged statues of Jesus Christ throughout the world. One, known as the Christ of the Abyss, sits in the waters off San Frutuoso, Italy. Made by sculptor Guido Galletti, It was placed in the Mediterranean Sea in 1954 as a tribute to Dario Gonzat, the first Italian to use scuba gear. The bronze likeness sits 56 feet below the water's surface. Another famous underwater Jesus sculpture can be found off the Florida Keys in John Pennekamp Coral Reef State Park. Dubbed the Christ of the Deep, the 4,000-pound barnacle-covered statue was created by Guido Galletti, the same sculptor who made the Christ of the Abyss in Italy. It was installed in the waters off Key Largo in 1965. It's the third of a series of Jesus statues that Galletti has placed underwater. The second sculpture was placed along the coastline of St. George's, Granada in 1961. It was a gift to the Navy of Genoa for their diligent efforts to rescue the crew of the MV Bianca C, an Italian vessel that was destroyed in a fire. Lake Michigan is home to the only underwater crucifix in the world. Measuring 11 feet tall, it features a nearly life-sized figure of Jesus. But it wasn't created by Galletti, unlike the other Jesus statues. In 1955, a teenage boy died in a car accident in the town of Bad Axe, Michigan. His grief-stricken family bought the crucifix as a memorial to the teen, but it broke during shipping, so they refused to take it. In 1962, a local diving club in the Little Traverse Bay gave the statue a home at the bottom of the lake in memory of a diver who died nearby. The town that drowned. Villa Epecuén was once a bustling tourist town for the ultra-wealthy. Back when it was in business, the small town with a population of only 1,500 accommodated up to 5,000 visitors at a time. But unfortunately, the town ran into a bit of trouble when a dam broke and the whole place was flooded under 30 feet of water. It happened over 25 years ago in Argentina, making Villa Epecuén one of the youngest cities in the world to be completely submerged. At least, it used to be submerged. This small town, which was founded in 1921, is located about 370 miles from Buenos Aires. It was on November 10, 1985, when the unthinkable happened. A dramatic storm caused the dam to burst, at which point water rushed into the town and rose at an incredible rate of half an inch every hour. The residents had time to flee, but not enough time to secure all their most prized possessions. Homes and businesses were left in a hurry, just before the floodwater finally covered everything. But here's the shocking twist. Villa Epecuén was underwater for 25 years. The water did eventually recede to its original level, leaving only a handful of areas still slightly submerged. The village is mostly dry now, but almost nobody lives here anymore. A man named Pablo Novak, 88 years old, returned to his home in 2009 and is apparently currently the only resident. Submerged settlement. Earlier this year, a team of archaeologists working in Lucerne, Switzerland, spotted old piles of mud-encrusted wood while assisting with the installation of a pipeline at the bottom of Lake Lucerne. Situated at least 13 feet below the water's surface, the site also contains pottery shards and the remains of stilts that once supported houses. Samples from the sunken village were radiocarbon dated back to around 1000 BC, during the Bronze Age, proving that the city was settled 2,000 years earlier than previously thought. The shocking discovery adds a totally unexpected new chapter to Lucerne's history. Until now, researchers could only definitively trace the city's founding back 800 years, but they long suspected that it dated back much further. Until the 15th century, Lake Lucerne's water levels were much lower than they are now. Around that time, a series of natural events and human activities caused the water to rise and consume the village, which once likely sat on the lakeside. A layer of mud concealed signs of the village until the beginning of the pipeline project, which offered archaeologists a chance to finally examine the lakebed in detail. Glowing snails. Biofluorescence is a trait most typically observed in bony fishes that live in tropical regions, where the supply of daylight is more consistent. It's when organisms absorb and re-emit light, so sunlight is an essential ingredient for biofluorescence. But the limited daylight in polar regions for much of the year makes it less likely to spot animals that glow in the dark in these places. Until very recently, a biofluorescent species had never been observed in Arctic waters. That all changed when researchers spotted snails glowing red and green off the Greenland coast and in the Bering Strait off Alaska. It looks like biofluorescence is completely possible during times when the Arctic experiences prolonged daylight. The authors of the study were pretty surprised. Marine fluorescence is pretty rare in the Arctic, so they were shocked when they spotted juvenile snailfish brightly showing off their fluorescence in not just one, but 2 different colors. Pretty impressive, right? Have you ever been diving? Have you ever spotted a glowing organism? Let me know in the comments below. Researchers said that this was very unusual in a single species. They are working to better understand biofluorescence across fish species in general. That was hard to say, fish species. It's probably used for many things that we are just starting to learn about. A new island. As the Antarctic Peninsula's 2 major glaciers retreat at remarkable speed, the melting ice is revealing parts of the planet that people of our time have never seen before. In February of last year, scientists with the International Thwaites Glacier Offshore Research Project announced the appearance of an uncharted island, visible above sea level for the first time amid the disappearing ice. Researchers discovered the 1,150-foot-long landmass while sailing off the Pine Island Glacier. They visited the island to examine the layer of brown rock and determined that it's made from volcanic granite. According to expedition member James Marshallek, it's the only such rocky outcropping in over 40 miles in each direction. The team named the landmass Sif Island after a Norse goddess representing the Earth. Most of the island is covered in ice, which researchers believe, based on satellite images, was once part of the dwindling Pine Island Glacier ice shelf. A time-lapse analysis shows that the ice shelf retreated steadily from the island starting in 2011. A process called rebounding, which happens when melting glacial ice relieves underlying pressure, may have caused Sif Island to rise above sea level. Ancient chicken egg. While excavating a watery pit in Buckinghamshire, England in 2016, scientists discovered 4 ancient chicken eggs. They only managed to retrieve 1 without breaking it. It was estimated to be around 1,700 years old, making it the only complete egg dating back to Roman-era Britain. The 3 eggs that broke, released with the team, later described as a putrid stench. After sitting around for over a millennium, I can imagine. Archaeologists uncovered other rare artifacts, including leather shoes, wooden tools, and a basket made from oak and willow. People threw items into the pit for good luck from the 3rd century onward. It functioned as an ancient wishing well of sorts, according to senior project manager Edward Biddulph, who spoke with the BBC. He speculated that the eggs may have been a food offering that was thrown into the pit during a funeral. Camo carpet shark. A diver recently had a bizarre encounter with a creature you've probably never heard of. The young diver, a lady from Spain named Claudia Argemi Danti, was visiting Australia when she spotted a wobbegong shark. Yes, a wobbegong shark, also known as a camo carpet shark. This monster doesn't look like your typical shark. It has a huge head, it's flat like a carpet you might have in your bedroom, and it's actually wider than it is long. These animals can grow over 10 feet long, and they have the exceptional ability to camouflage themselves. Their camouflage is what makes them so hard to spot, since they blend in so well with the ocean floor. Luckily, this amazing encounter did not turn deadly. Although they look docile and harmless, wobbegong sharks are known for occasionally attacking people. They are still sharks, after all. They just so happen to look a little ridiculous. What would you do if you came face to face with this bizarre underwater creature? Let me know in the comments below. And I wanted to give a big shout out to Tony Sue and Artina Jashari. Thanks so much, guys! If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already for more videos like these. Port of Amathus. The Port of Amathus was an artificial harbor that was likely built during the 3rd or 4th century BC near the modern-day city of Limassol in what is now southern Cyprus. Described by experts as an impressive but short-lived large public port project of the Hellenistic period, which may never have been completed, it contains 3 piers made from large carved rectangular stones, which were built to protect ships from strong winds. Today, the ancient port's outer harbor sits 13 feet underwater and extends 328 feet from the shore. Sadly, it appears as though the site was never used for its intended purpose, and the area was abandoned entirely by the 6th century. It was probably due to Arab raids, although archaeologists admittedly don't know for sure why residents fled Amathus. A team from the French archaeological mission of Amathus first excavated the submerged site in the 1980s. In 2005, an artificial reef was established among the ruins, and in a sense caused great stress to the structures, according to an academic paper written by Maria Ktori from the University of Cyprus. Now, officials want to turn the site into an underwater park. The plan is causing tensions between those concerned about the harbor's preservation and those worried about the proposed removal of a protected marine plant called Neptune grass. Authorities are pushing forward with the plans and have promised the public that they will protect the plant, which is vital to aquatic ecosystems in the Mediterranean, as well as the submerged ruins. Trapped sea creatures. Rising global temperatures recently caused an iceberg roughly 2 times the size of New York City to break free from the Antarctic ice sheet and drift into the Weddell Sea. Shortly after, scientists aboard the German vessel Polarstern traveled to the narrow stretch of water that now separates the iceberg from the rest of the continent, where they took extensive footage and thousands of pictures of the creatures living below the area that was covered in thick ice for over 50 years. They discovered a diverse community of mollusks, filter feeders, sea stars, sea cucumbers, 5 or more fish species, and 2 species of squid. The findings came not long after researchers aboard another vessel spotted a sea sponge colony 3,000 feet below the Filchner-Ronne ice shelf. Scientists are perplexed by the presence of sea sponges and other stationary filter feeders beneath ice, because these life forms rely on sunlight for photosynthesis, so they are typically found in the sunniest parts of the ocean. Finding entire communities of creatures living in the dark makes no sense. The discoveries prove that somehow nutrients are making their way thousands of feet under the ice of Antarctica to provide food for these bottom-dwelling organisms. Researchers took sediment samples from the ocean floor to try to better understand how the ecosystem works. Prehistoric mining sites. While swimming through the Sagitario underwater cave system beneath Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, a pair of divers found a rare prehistoric pigment mining site. The submerged tools, fire pits, and other fixtures date back to sometime between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago, when the region's indigenous inhabitants extracted iron-rich red ochre. It's just one of a few discoveries that show how ancient people acquired the bold pigment. Soon after, 2 other suspected underwater mining sites were confirmed nearby, and there may be more to come. It's not just a one-off sort of thing, geoarchaeologist Edward Reinhardt told National Geographic. There was an active program to prospect, find, and extract ochre. There'll no doubt be more locations. Evidence shows that for around 2,000 years, people embarked on organized expeditions into the mines. Red ochre has been used by societies around the world for thousands of years and in a variety of ways, including for practical purposes such as sunscreen and mosquito repellent, and in artwork and rituals. But researchers are unsure what some of America's earliest inhabitants, the people who first mined at the underwater cave site, used the pigment for. Apollo 11 rocket engines. The 1969 Apollo 11 mission is famous for putting a man on the moon for the first time. After launching on July 16th of that year, it deposited its Saturn V F1 rocket engines into the Atlantic Ocean. 2 of them were found in 2012, courtesy of a team from Bezos Expeditions, an exploration company owned by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. They found the rocket engines using deep-sea sonar, then used remotely operated vehicles to gain a closer look. The crew found a tangled and time-worn mess of parts on the sea floor, 14,000 feet below the water's surface. There was only one way to tell how intact the parts were: by removing them from the water. In a statement, Bezos explained that the rocket engines had hit the surface at high velocity before spending over 40 years in highly corrosive salt water. At the same time, he said they are made of tough stuff, so we'll see. Because 67 Saturn V F1 engines were launched between 1967 and 1973, the team had to verify that the pair were actually from Apollo 11. They confirmed this several months later by examining the part's extremely worn and barely detectable serial number. A lost helicopter. Off the coast of Pacific Beach in San Diego, underwater diver Tyler Stalter discovered the wreckage of a Dauntless bomber from World War II. It had gone down during training exercises, killing both pilots on board. Their bodies were never recovered. Shortly after the discovery of the mysterious crash, Tyler Stalter made another shocking find. He uncovered the holy grail of sunken helicopters. what he believes to be the Halo 66. The Halo 66 was a Navy Sea King most famous for its role in pulling the astronauts from the Apollo 11 mission out of the water after their capsule splashed down off the coast of California. That was in 1969. 6 years later, in 1975, the legendary Sea King crashed during a nighttime training exercise. All 4 of the crew members were able to be rescued, though one of them did die several weeks later from his injuries. The official report at the time said that the helicopter sank at least 4,800 feet deep. However, Tyler Stelter just found it at only 200 feet deep. It was uncovered with the fuselage still intact, though the rest of the helicopter was in pretty rough shape. Aboriginal settlements. Archaeologists discovered the first known examples of submerged Aboriginal settlements while working off the Australian coast last year. Constructed on dry land in the country's northwestern region, the 2 sites slowly sank into the ocean toward the end of the last ice age amid rising sea levels. One settlement, located off the Dampier Archipelago, contains hundreds of stone tools, including mullers and grinding stones, which were found just 8 feet below the water surface. The other site, which sits 46 feet below sea level, yielded at least 1 stone-cutting tool made from locally sourced materials. Radiocarbon dating showed that both settlements are at least 7,000 years old. The timing makes sense. Humans first arrived in Australia around 65,000 years ago, when sea levels were much lower than they are now. As the climate cooled and the planet entered its most recent ice age, these levels fell even more. At the ice age's peak around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were around 427 feet below where they currently stand. Between 18,000 and 8,000 years ago, global temperatures began to rise, and the ocean swallowed up dry land along the coastline, submerging the 2 recently discovered sites. The settlements were significant to the people who used them, who lived along the coast after traveling to Australia from what is now Indonesia by boat. Scientists believe there are more underwater Aboriginal sites waiting to be found, and that studying them will provide key insight into unanswered questions about the movement and history of prehistoric humans. Underwater artwork. When sea levels were much lower during the Pleistocene epoch, the coast of southern France extended several miles further outward than it does today. During that time, prehistoric people living in the area entered a seaside cave that sat as much as 330 feet above sea level and covered the walls with ancient artwork depicting hand stencils and a variety of land and sea animals, such as bison, ibex, horses, auks, a type of bird, and seals. Over thousands of years, the water rose, eventually submerging roughly 4/5 of the cave, including its entrance, which now sits at roughly 121 feet below sea level. Diver Henri Cosquer discovered the paintings in 1985 and kept quiet about the discovery. Sadly, the site became widely known in 1991 after 3 divers got lost in the cave and died. Researchers said that this is the only painted cave in the world with an entrance below present-day sea level where cave art has been preserved from the flooding that occurred when the seas rose after the end of the last ice age. At least that has been found. You have to admit it has to be quite a special set of conditions for the water to stop filling up a prehistoric cave just enough to keep the artwork safe. No other Paleolithic art had previously been discovered in the area, and the paintings are estimated to be between 19,000 and 27,000 years old. Today, Cosquer Cave is accessible to divers via a 574-foot-long tunnel, which features submerged artwork leading up to the part of the cave that remains above sea level. That's pretty cool, too. I have to work on my diving skills. Salty polar lakes on Mars. Is it possible that other planets have lakes of some sort? Earth is not the only planet with polar ice caps. Mars has them too, and experts have wondered if there could be water hidden beneath them. And if there is water, then perhaps there is life. Recent research shows that this is, in fact, a possibility. In 2018, scientists detected what they believe to be a lake below the red planet's south pole. Measuring 12 by 18 miles across, it sits under a mile of ice. Such a groundbreaking discovery could perhaps offer insight into any possibility of past or present life on Mars. New evidence gathered from radar data revealed the presence of 4 lakes over a 155 by 185 mile area beneath the Martian South Pole. One of them is the lake found in 2018, while the other 3 are considerably smaller, measuring roughly 6 by 6 miles. Researchers do not believe that the lakes formed from polar melting, but that they are left over from a larger water body that once sat on the surface, and that they have an extremely high salt content that keeps them liquid despite frigid temperatures. The lakes could be millions or billions of years old and may have formed when the planet's climate was warmer, study co-author and geophysicist Elena Pettinelli told Space.com. The team hopes to conduct more research and find out if there are more lakes beneath the Martian ice caps, and to collect a sample of the surface at the poles for further research. Mystifying blob. Several years ago, divers encountered a huge, unexplainable jelly-like orb off the western coast of Norway. It measured over 3 feet wide and had a dark streak through the center. Nearly 100 similar sightings have been reported near Norway and in the Mediterranean Sea since 1985. Until recently, scientists were just as perplexed as anyone else when it came to identifying the bizarre translucent blobs. A DNA analysis finally put the mystery to rest last year, when researchers identified the orbs as rarely seen egg sacs belonging to the short-fin squid. The species is common throughout the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic. Each orb can hold hundreds or even thousands of eggs, which sit suspended in a slowly dissolving mucus. Scientists have known about the short-fin squid for over 180 years, but this was the first time that they identified the species' eggs in the wild. They also observed squid embryos throughout 4 different stages of development and watched the changes in the sac as the eggs matured. The large orbs keep the creature's eggs buoyant, protecting the unborn young from predators along the sea floor. Mystery solved. Ancient Roman coins. Near the end of the summer in 2021, a pair of divers exploring the coast off the island of Portixol in Spain discovered one of the largest collections of Roman gold coins that has ever been found in Europe. Divers Luis Lenz and Cesar Jimeno were thrilled when they accidentally found 8 coins underwater. To them, it felt like being in an Indiana Jones movie. They were extremely excited and even alerted the local culture and heritage officials of the discovery. But after being on dry land for a bit, they started getting curious. They packed up their scuba gear and went back underwater, hoping to find even more coins. Lucky for them, when they returned to the original site, they uncovered 45 additional gold coins. It turned into one of the biggest underwater treasure hauls in European history. The coins have been dated back 1,500 years. According to researchers from the University of Alicante, they were minted between the end of the 4th century and the start of the 5th century. And to make the find even more miraculous, the coins were in almost perfect condition. The inscription was still legible on almost all of the coins. Researchers were able to tell immediately that they were made during the rule of 5 different Roman emperors. The next question becomes, why were these coins hiding underwater? They weren't part of a shipwreck, they were just scattered at the bottom of the sea. One of the professors from the university, Jaime Vidal, says the gold probably belonged to a landowner who hid the stash near the coast to protect his wealth from invaders pouring into the Roman Empire, probably the Visigoths. The landowner must have either died or simply forgot where he hid the coins, and over time, the land where he had stashed them ended up underwater. Ancient rock. Late last year, a coalition of Native American tribal citizens and activists from Michigan found what they believe are ancient rock formations in the Straits of Mackinac. The last time the sites were above water was around 10,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age. These discoveries contradict the findings of a consulting firm that found no signs of significant cultural resources ahead of a planned project to replace an aging pipeline known as Line 5, under the direction of the Enbridge Energy Company. In response to the possible presence of submerged archaeological sites, indigenous communities, activists, and field experts are calling for an end to the project. University of Michigan archaeologist John O'Shea is among those who are growing increasingly worried about the potential loss of history and heritage. While working on Lake Huron in 2009, he discovered sunken formations similar to those recently found in the Straits of Mackinac, as well as evidence of prehistoric campsites containing evidence of caribou hunting. Speaking with the Detroit Metro Times, he said that if the proposed pipeline project moves forward, the archaeological ruins would be obliterated without a trace. Consequently, the Line 5 project is currently caught in the throes of a contentious court battle between those who are calling for more investigation and Enbridge Energy, which asserts that its operations comply with safety standards and do not jeopardize any possible underwater ruins. The company recently continued operating its existing old pipeline after receiving a shutdown order from the government, showing that it refuses to go down without a fight. Should things continue on their current trajectory, researchers may never get the chance to study the submerged sites that could prove integral to understanding the movement and culture of ancient people in North America. Just like with the underwater Aboriginal settlements from Australia, it would be great for the United States to also look to see what ancient people left behind. Beagle Channel Projectile Point. Located in Argentina's Tierra del Fuego archipelago at the extreme tip of South America, the Beagle Channel is the site of a fascinating discovery of an ancient projectile point deeper underwater than any others ever found in the region. Biologists found the prehistoric artifact while dredging the water about a mile from shore and alerted archaeologist Atilio Sangrando, who recognized it as something remarkable. The discovery begged the question of how the projectile point ended up where it was found, and figuring out the answer could help researchers better understand the movement of the region's earliest human population. Determining the item's age is the first step to solving the mystery, as the Beagle Channel's water levels have changed over time. During the last ice age, for example, water levels were much lower, and the Beagle Channel was merely a lake. Sea levels rose when glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age, starting around 15,000 years ago, dramatically altering the landscape and turning the lake into the channel as we know it today. The point could have been from a hunting spear on land, or it could mean that people here were hunting in the water. People began using rudimentary boats and watercraft at least 7,000 years ago, and maybe a hunter used it as a harpoon. Unfortunately, scientists cannot radiocarbon date the artifact because it contains no organic matter, and since it was removed from the water, there is no way to tell if there were other artifacts nearby. Researchers are on the case to learn more about the people who created it. World War II pilot. After months of underwater excavations, the U.S. military has found the remains of at least one pilot that was shot down in 1944. Reports of 2 U.S. aircraft found underwater in the Republic of Palau led to investigations that lasted several years. Divers in 2015 identified the aircraft as an F-6F-3 Hellcat and a TB-M1C Avenger. Then the excavation began, led by an underwater recovery team that worked 12-hour shifts for 45 days to remove the sand and uncover the remains. Using heavy machinery, including a crane to lift heavy objects, as well as a variety of archaeological tools to meticulously filter through sediment, the team worked to recover the pilot, who was one of 4 service members who died when both planes were shot down. Taking multiple dives to fill one basket and 5 hours to sift through each one, it was a tiring but fulfilling process for the teams, who hoped to bring closure to at least one family who suffered the loss of their loved one to the war. Tens of thousands of people are still considered missing from past U.S. wars. 72,941 people are still missing from World War II alone. There are another 7,705 missing from the Korean War and 1,599 people from the Vietnam War. The Defense and POW MIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA, is still trying to find them. A forest. Off the Alabama coast in the Gulf of Mexico, there is a 16,000-year-old cypress forest that once stood on dry land. The trees sprouted along the banks of a river at around the same time ancient humans are believed to have started migrating out of Africa. Sea levels rose, eventually engulfing the entire forest. It sat undisturbed until 2004, when Hurricane Ivan disturbed the seabed, revealing its presence in modern-day Mobile Bay. Last year, scientists announced that the trees contain materials that might be useful in the development of certain life-saving medicines. This realization came after divers retrieved samples of the wood as part of a NOAA-funded expedition. Divers found that the trees were remarkably well preserved after spending years buried in sediment that prevented oxygen from reaching them and causing them to decay. Experts removed over 300 organisms from the wood, including a previously unknown species of shipworm that produces over 100 types of bacteria. Many of the bacteria are new to science and are undergoing DNA analysis to determine their potential medical uses in cancer-fighting and pain medications. According to a NOAA statement, in the past, at least one shipworm species has shown promise as a possible antibiotic against parasitic worm infections. The wood may also prove to be useful in paper products, renewable fuel, chemicals, animal feed, and more. Masked seahorse. Photographer Nikos Samaras took the strangest picture off the coast of northern Greece. The amazing photograph was one of 3,500 nominated for the Ocean Photography Award in 2021. And guess what? He won the award. He was also given a nomination for Conservation Photographer of the Year. While swimming in the waters off Greece, Nikos came across a seahorse dragging along a single-use mask. The seahorse had one of the mask straps tucked into its tail, dragging the thing along like a deflated parachute. The reason the photograph turned into such a big deal is that it shed some disturbing light on not only the issue of marine pollution, but the issue of medical waste that has been dumped into the ocean since the beginning of 2020. We've all seen turtles stuck in plastic rings or covered in plastic bags, but seahorses hanging onto surgical masks is completely new. But it's not that surprising considering somewhere around 1.6 billion disposable masks went into the ocean in 2020. According to scientists, it will take them 450 years to degrade. And just wait until you hear the next part. Masks have already created a massive clump of waste in the ocean, almost 10% the size of the Great Garbage Plastic Patch. And it's continuing to grow. Rome's Sin City. Situated next to an active volcano in what is now Italy's Bay of Naples, Baia was once an upscale resort town whose vacationers included some of the biggest names in Roman history, such as Nero, Cicero, Septimius Severus, Caesar, and more. It was famous for both its medicinal hot springs and as a haven of vice, where the rich and powerful indulged in heavy drinking, lustful encounters, and other forms of debauchery. Between 100 BC and 500 AD, wealthy Romans treated Baia as their playground, but volcanic activity eventually laid claim to the site, causing its lower portion to sink into the sea. Then, during the 8th century, a Muslim army sacked the city, which by then had lost nearly all its lower portion to the sea. Recurrent malaria prompted residents to flee for good by the year 1500. Excavations have uncovered layers of temples, villas, Roman baths, and other buildings, as well as sculptures and vividly colored mosaics that have somehow withstood the test of time in their watery grave. Around 90% of Baia's sunken ruins are still a mystery, and ongoing volcanic and seismic activity are threatening to destroy the ancient city for good. What's now underwater once consisted of 400 acres of luxury spas and villas that have yet to be fully explored. And if researchers don't race against the clock to get the job done, these ancient structures and artifacts may be lost to history. Prehistoric Aboriginal settlement. Australia's first human settlers arrived around 65,000 years ago, but scientists have only started undertaking large-scale efforts to recover Aboriginal sites and artifacts in recent years. A groundbreaking study published last year describes one such site that, like many others, became submerged amid rising sea levels after the end of the last ice age. Discovered off Murujuga, also called the Dampier Archipelago in northwestern Australia as part of an ongoing project called Deep History of Sea Country, the settlement dates back roughly 7,000 years. Led by maritime archaeologist Jonathan Benjamin of Flinders University, the team chose the site knowing that 18,000 years ago, its coastline extended roughly 100 miles further than it does today. After an exhaustive search using boats equipped with sonar and LiDAR-mounted planes, a team member discovered a tool made from igneous rock. From there, they found more, amounting to 269 artifacts total. Nearby, in Flying Foam Passage, the researchers discovered a second site containing a stone tool dating back at least 8,500 years. These are the first known marine archaeological sites in the tropics dating back more than 5,000 years. The tools appear to have been used for practical purposes like scraping, cutting, hammering, and grinding. Sites like these can help experts learn more about how ancient people made their way from Southeast Asia to Australia, if scientists can successfully campaign for the same level of protection from off-sea development that is afforded to shipwrecks. Submerged settlement. The site known as Atlit Yam is one of the world's best preserved prehistoric underwater settlements. Discovered during the 1980s and excavated in the following years, the ruins tell the story of a pre-pottery people who were repeatedly forced inland as the sea encroached on their homes. 9,000 years ago, a Neolithic fishing village along the coast of what is now Haifa, Israel, was consumed by the Mediterranean Sea amid rising sea levels. Despite the climate-related changes they struggled with, The residents of Atlit Yam displayed immense resourcefulness and innovation. They built the world's first freshwater wells, erected impressive megaliths, and enjoyed a varied diet of over 100 plants, as well as fish and wild and domestic meat. People lived unusually long lives for the time, with many reaching 50 years of age despite the population's struggles against disease, including the earliest known cases of tuberculosis. Evidence shows that Atlit Yam's residents fled suddenly, indicating that there was more to its abandonment than gradually rising seas. Some researchers believe that a tsunami triggered by a volcanic collapse swallowed the settlement. Others have suggested that perhaps it was the biblical Noah's flood. Atlit Yam is one of the world's most thoroughly excavated submerged archaeological sites, but the cause of its demise remains a mystery. By studying similar sites along the Israel coast, experts hope to learn more about exactly what prompted people to leave so abruptly. Vintage Bugatti. In 2009, a 1925 Bugatti Type 22 Brescia Roadster was found at the bottom of Lake Maggiore along the border of Italy and Switzerland. After sitting underwater for 73 years, it was damaged and heavily rusted. Despite this, the car sold at auction for around $400,000. But how did it get to the bottom of the lake in the first place? According to records, the car was registered to a French address when it ended up in Lake Maggiore in 1935. Grand Prix driver René Dreyfus had reportedly lost it to Swiss playboy Adalbert Baudet during a drunken poker game the previous year. Adalbert allegedly tried to bring the car into Switzerland, but didn't want to pay the hefty import taxes that came with it. So he told the authorities to do whatever they wanted with it, and they supposedly handled the matter by rolling the car into the lake. This might sound crazy, but at the time, the vehicle wasn't worth much. It was rediscovered in 1967 by a diver named Hugo Pillon. Over 40 years later, a local dive club finally rescued it with plans to sell it and put the proceeds towards a charity that combats youth violence. Peter Mullen, who owns the Mullen Automotive Museum in California, bought the Bugatti and put it on display there. He did not restore it, but instead left it as is, placing it in an exhibit that recreates the feel of being at the bottom of a lake. Prehistoric city of Tiquina. The Belgian archaeologist Christophe Delaire discovered evidence of an early civilization at the bottom of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. Christophe heard rumors of the sunken city from the locals and decided to dive down to the bottom to see what he could find. Turns out, he found a lot. Little did anyone know there was an actual city sitting at the very bottom of the lake. We now know it to be the lost city of Tiquina. The initial discovery was made about 10 years ago, but since then, scientific teams have found at least 24 separate archaeological remains. These remains make up an underwater metropolis, a submerged city so impressive that the Bolivian government is actually constructing a museum to commemorate the ruins down there. It will cost millions of dollars, but part of the museum will be underwater. This will allow visitors to glimpse the ancient city through the murk of the lake. But what about the city itself? Which ancient civilization built it? It was the pre-Hispanic empire known as the Tiwanaku who likely constructed the city, at a time when Lake Titicaca was still dry land. This was over 2,000 years ago, way before the Inca ever came on the scene. Tiwanaku was one of the most powerful civilizations anywhere in South America, reaching their peak power between 500 and 900 AD. It was around this time that their great city of Tiquina sank, and the Tiwanaku people vanished without a trace. Atlit Yam. Atlit Yam is an ancient fishing settlement off Israel's Carmel coast, dating back between 6900 and 6300 BC. Discovered in 1984 by marine archaeologist Ehud Galili, it sits 33 feet underwater and is one of the world's best preserved underwater prehistoric sites, offering a rare glimpse at pre-pottery Neolithic society. Spanning roughly 10 acres, the site contains houses, graves, human burials, and a semicircular arrangement of 7 stone monoliths that once surrounded a spring, representing the earliest known man-made freshwater wells. Scientists also uncovered the remains of 100 plant species, including both harvested and collected species, as well as wild and domestic fish and animal bones. Atlit Yam's residents lived to 50 years old on average, which is impressive for the time, and enjoyed good health, perhaps owing to their balanced and varied diets. But the society faced challenges, including disease. The human remains found at the site were the earliest known evidence of tuberculosis, proving that the disease is at least 3,000 years older than researchers previously thought. And they also suffered from malaria and an ear condition related to cold water diving. For reasons that experts can't seem to agree on, Atlit Yam was abruptly abandoned. Possible factors include a volcanic eruption in the Mediterranean, a tsunami, and rising sea levels. Evidence shows that chronic flooding hit the region around 9,000 years ago, and Atlit Yam's fate serves as an ominous example of what modern coastal communities may face as today's sea levels continue to rise. World War I submarine. In 2019, archaeologists with Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History announced the discovery of the first ever historical submarine found in the country's waters. Known as the USS H-1 Seawolf, the vessel was spotted off the shore of Santa Margarita Island in the state of Baja California Sur. Built in San Francisco in 1909, the sub was used by the U.S. Navy to patrol the Atlantic coast of Long Island during World War I. While en route back to California in 1920, the Seawolf ran aground during a storm. U.S. Navy ships tried but failed to get the vessel floating again. It was abandoned, and numerous shipwreck experts tried finding it in the decades that followed, but with no luck. Acting on a tip from photojournalist Alfredo Martinez, archaeologists finally located the submarine in Magdalena Bay off Santa Margarita in 2016. Locals had seen it at various times over the years, and at some point the Seawolf was looted for its bronze parts. The badly damaged vessel measures 145 feet, according to measurements taken in recent years. Researchers performed 2 dives and took detailed measurements and thousands of photographs of the submarine before the elements further destroy what's left of it. Over the next few years, they plan to continue monitoring the progression of decay and identify areas of the sunken vehicle that have been looted. An ancient lake, hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of years ago, when northwestern Greenland was ice-free, a lake formed there. Occupying an area of over 2,700 square miles, it was about the size of Rhode Island and Delaware combined. It was over 800 feet deep at its deepest point. At least 18 streams fed into the lake from the north, draining through an outlet to the south. At various points throughout the last million years, Greenland's ice advanced and retreated. Today, the lake sits 1.1 miles beneath the existing ice sheet. Scientists do not know when it last held water, and all that's left of it is sediment. They discovered the Paleo Lake Basin using surface-penetrating radar and only know rudimentary details about it so far. Theories suggest that perhaps a glacier carved the lake, or maybe a depression formed when an ancient, now dormant fault line pulled the Earth apart. Until or unless the ice covering the lake melts, the only way to learn more about it, including its age, is to drill into it. Researchers believe the buried sediments may contain evidence of past climates and lives, information that could potentially prove valuable in understanding how Greenland responds to climate change. Unlike discoveries in recent years of subglacial liquid lakes in Greenland and Antarctica, this is the first discovery of a fossil lake bed beneath the ice. Scientists are tentatively planning a project to drill into northwestern Greenland's bedrock in the next several years, although it's unknown whether they will drill into the lake bed. A strip club. While researching off the Israeli coast several years ago, marine biologist Gil Koplovitz came across a submerged nightlife venue that was no longer in business. He released perplexing images of the abandoned establishment in 2013. Located in Eilat, the business originally opened as a restaurant called the Red Sea Star. It was reportedly later repurposed as an erotic dancing venue, aka a strip club, called Nymphis Show Bar. The building's entrance is above water. Speaking with the Huffington Post, Koplovitz explained that visitors crossed a 230-foot bridge and then descended a flight of stairs to get inside. He said he was unsure when the strip joint closed its doors. Koplovitz snapped photos of the former club's interior through the resting venue's glass windows. The images show a stripper pole that functioned as a centerpiece. It was once surrounded by tables and chairs that have since been removed. Curiously, very little information is available online about the Nymphis Show Bar, other than the details Koplovitz offered after conducting his own investigation. It may have been the only underwater strip club that ever existed. The MS Estonia. In September 2021, a private expedition traveled to the site of the MS Estonia wreckage. The expedition used the research vessel, the RS Sentinel, to go deep underwater to the very place where this infamous ferry sank on September 28, 1994. It was actually the relatives of the victims of the shipwreck that funded the expedition. For those unaware of this terrible tragedy, the MS Estonia was on its way from Tallinn to Stockholm when it ran into some trouble, sank, and 852 people on board were killed. There were only 138 survivors. All these years later, it's still the second deadliest sinking of a ship in Europe during peacetime. But why go in search of this sunken vessel all these years later? The expedition is actually trying to solve a few troublesome questions. The families want to know why the ship sank and why all their loved ones had to die. In 1997, the official disaster report stated that the fatal event was caused by locks on the bow door failing, causing the door to separate from the vessel. Water then poured into the vehicle deck of the ferry and caused the ship to sink. But almost 30 years later, the relatives of the dead want a more concise answer. They funded the expedition to get to the bottom of what truly happened, probably so they have someone to blame and that it never happens again. Thanks for watching! Do you like to go diving or snorkeling? Have you found anything interesting? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!